Another part of the survey dealt with student student use of technology. What types of tools they've adopted for their own personal use, what they are asked to do at school, and I think there's some really interesting stuff that's in that data. One of the questions was regarding social networks, and we asked students to identify what types of tools they use, and so going through those tools and picking out the things that would be considered social network. In other words, something where a student creates an online profile, has some sort of online existence where they're publishing things. That would be like Facebook or Twitter, a blog, a Flickr account, and then for even younger kids, something like a Webkins account would be considered a form of social networking. We see kind of a pretty steady increase from 4th grade through 10th grade, with 5th grade being a little slight anomaly in the data here. I'm not exactly sure why, but otherwise it's pretty much a steady increase from 4th through 10th in their adoption of these kinds of tools, which isn't really alarming. But what was kind of surprising for me was just the sheer volume of students at the 5th grade level, or even the 4th grade level, who are engaging in these networks on their own, especially since most of those kinds of tools require you to be 13 or over to create an account. There's a couple things could be happening. Either our students who are under 13 are creating accounts and lying about their age, which certainly does happen, or parents are allowing them to do that, which is also happens quite often. Either way, we have a fairly high number of students, even in the lower grades, who are engaging online. And I'm gonna lean here again on Dr. Watkins, who's done some of the most extensive research in this area. And Watkins says that social networking sites, much to the chagrin of educators, are a pervasive presence in the lives of schools. And so, here at EMID we have a very open filtering policy. We have access to most of these types of networks and tools or sites where students are creating these profiles and engaging online and having part of their social and intellectual lives played out online. And a lot of other schools, especially about 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, when social networks just started to really grow in prominence, made the choice to block these tools, to filter them out. And so I think that's really what this quote here speaks to is the purposeful separation of tools that kids are using for online engagement from the types of engagement they do in schools, has created in many cases a disconnect, especially when you consider how much writing students do on these platforms. So I had a student about 5 years ago who was said to be illiterate, who couldn't read or write anything really, is what I was told, and he'd routinely fail reading comprehension tests and all that sort of thing. But I had noticed that on his MySpace account, he was writing daily and interacting with his friends, and so he was demonstrating when he wasn't prompted to demonstrate. In that space, he was demonstrating a fairly high level of literacy skill, which certainly calls into question for us whether or not our own tests for for literacy, for instance, really measure how literate a student is. And there's quite a few different researchers out there who over the years have demonstrated that there are quite a few gaps in the reliability of such measures. But when what kind of gets to me here, and I'm going to venture into the more into the analysis phase here than anything, is that when we draw that line in the sand and say that social networking is not acceptable in schools, or it's not appropriate for schools, we're basically telling a lot of our students, especially our students who engage highly in these places, that the type of writing that they do there, which largely becomes for most of them the place where they're engaging with text and other forms of symbols and literacy the most, that's not an authentic or important or true or appropriate place to be engaged in literacy. So we've divorced schooling from what is growing to be the number one the number one place for students to engage in any kind of authentic literacy skills from the classroom. Now we'll move on here to a couple other things. I'll come back to that again here in a little bit. But so this question here was, we asked the students how often they were asked in school to use or allowed in school to use technology for creative purposes, and fewer than half in most cases, or roughly half of the students, said that they were given opportunities to be creative quite often. And we had fairly low numbers of students who said that they were never given this opportunity, which meant that the rest of them kind of fell in between. So we'll move on here. On the other hand, this is where we get a little bit of difference in the age group for the data. This is students who've been asked to do research, and we have in sixth grade we have a fairly low number of students who seem to be asked to do research on a consistent basis, whereas in 10th grade it's most of our students report having been asked to do research using technology on a consistent basis, and none of them reported never having done so. I suppose this could be interpreted in a number of ways. I'm really not exactly sure how useful this is to us right now, other than it seems like in some grades the students are perhaps doing more research type projects than others. So the next question was how frequently have you been asked to solve a problem using technology? And here we have another indication here that we have. The blue here represents never, the red is more than 3 times, and these percentages are fairly low. So we have, especially in the lower grades, fewer students being asked to solve problems, and then the upper grades, more students. I suppose this is also probably appropriate, given the way that this data falls here. I guess I would personally like to see more red on this chart, but this, I don't believe this is inconsistent with the pattern we'd like to see. The next question was how often were you asked to publish something? And so here's where the disconnect comes, I believe, where we have students who are clearly at home engaging, or on their own engaging in lots of online publishing, because that is the inherent nature of a social network, is both a publish and consume. And here we have very low numbers of students saying that they are consistently or ever asked to publish anything while at school. And I think this is an area that we could certainly work on. Now, I don't mean to say, from looking at this data, that we necessarily need to be friends with our Facebook friends. I'm putting the little quotes around that, with our students. What I am saying here is that I think it's important to at least acknowledge the importance of their online or digital lives, and perhaps it would be helpful for everyone for all teachers working with students, to have an online presence for themselves. So, and I think I've tried to do this over this last year with our Web 2.0 and Connectivist Learning Group, where we were trying to connect teachers to teachers, in a similar way that our students are connected to each other. And this comes out of a few ideas here. So I'm gonna do a little jumping around, and so here we have. This is from Herb Cole. Herb Cole is known for his work in social justice education, and he's written quite a few books. One of the more famous is 36 Children, and this is one I read most recently called Stupidity and Tears. But I have 3 quotes from Herb Cole that I think really frame the need for us to, especially if we're not, if we don't come from the same cultures or the same background as a lot of our students, how it's really important maybe for us to take that plunge and become digital citizens. And so here's what Herb Cole says. He says, when I first began teaching, I didn't know how to speak to or with my students. Standing in front of a group of young people is a linguistic challenge. It is not merely a matter of what you say, but of how your language is understood and how you understand the language of your students. And so, if we don't have a common language, it's going to be hard to reach our students. And so we can accomplish some of that common language, even if we can't grow up in their own situation. If we're not the same race or the same religion, same socioeconomic status, if we come from a college-educated background and they don't, at least we can all be we can all share in the same kind of online experience, and that can be a basis for a lot of our similarities with our students or connections to them. So here's another one I think is relevant here. So without learning to observe children and thereby knowing something of the people one is living with 5 hours a day, the teacher resorts to routine and structure for protection. And I'll close with this one here before I move on and do part 3 of this analysis of our survey data. So Cole says, I learned that unless you knew and cared about your students outside the classroom, about their strengths, dreams, and aspirations, as well as their problems, you could easily limit what they could do as students and miss the opportunity to develop a learning community where they could act as themselves and not according to some image that they developed of how children should or shouldn't behave in school. I came to understand that the ability of children to act naturally and to ease with themselves, their friends, and teachers within a learning environment is the key to effective education. Oh, and one more last thing that I think supports this as well from Watkins. So in the age of do-it-yourself media, the fact that we are both consumers and creators of content redefines the rules of media engagement by redefining the rules of media production and consumption. So when I come back, for part 3, we'll look at what the students actually say.